Hello and welcome to this episode on the energy trends of 2025. I am delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to begin this episode by geeking out on the divine numerology of 2025. And then later on in the episode, I am going to be bringing in the guides for them to share a channeled message about the energy trends of 2025. So super juicy to be here and excited to dive in. So I want to start us off with a galactic view of the 2000s. The 2025 is a quarter of the way through the 100 years to go from 2000 all the way up to 2025, 2050, 2075, 2099, all the way up to 2100. So that looking at it from the century level and from the perspective of us being a quarter of a way through 2000 to 2100. And that when there's a quarter energy, right, like a 25 years into that century, there's a certain level of momentum that starts to build in that century. And so by us starting out with kind of the galactic view of 2025 and looking at the 20 part of that, looking at what the 20 part of that is bringing forward from the perspective of our divine numerology body of work that the guides and I have brought in through divine light activation, that the two, as you know as well, it has a lot to do with creating momentum, partnerships. You probably heard that saying, when two or more are gathered, the sum is larger than its parts. And there's a real kind of momentum, acceleration, leverage, positioning, repositioning within the two and within the 20. And the zero, if we look at the zero, zeros are very powerful. If you put anything to the power of a zero, it's the unique signature energy of the thing. The difference between 100 and a million is zeros. If you multiply something by a zero, it nullifies it. So the zero also has a lot of magic in it. It has a lot of the word that's really coming is momentum. So this century is really like putting the gas in, putting the rocket fuel in the rocket of this transition that we've been in a larger level, right? We're not talking about the 2000 year, we're talking about the 100 year, which is already pretty good. Yet that there's even more positioning in this decade, and in this century, and in this 25 years. So if you just kind of do a snapshot of 2000, right? Like you may remember 1999 and 2000 and where you were and where your life was. And then 2012 had a very like big rite of passage kind of an energy where there was a lot of things moving around and the end of the mind count, And then 2024 was also like another 12 years into that. And so then when we get to 2025, there's a larger, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a larger resource of the last 25 years to kind of allow greater clarity about what this century is about. And so also when there's a repeating number like 20 and 2020, like 2020, there's a big thing going on in 2020, right? Like there was a global recalibration. There was a lot of energy around security, around health, that was brought to the surface. There was really a reprioritization of, is what it is that you're up to, what matters most to you, asking some of the bigger questions. So when you also look at the year, like 2020, and what was happening in 2020 as a line of the hologram, it can also bring you more awareness of 2000 to 2100. And so what's really amazing about the 20s, 2025 and all the 20s, is that there really is, again, this momentum energy, the momentum to create worlds, the positioning of the optimal individuals' experiences, to be really in that right place and at the right time, individually, and then also in terms of the global uh, expansion and the larger evolution in consciousness. Now, it may not always feel like that, right? Like it, because of duality, things have gotten more transparent, where that which was hidden is now more on the surface, so you can see it. And sometimes when you see it, you go, oof, seems like, or there can be an interpretation that things are getting worse, that duality is worse than ever. Yet there is that wholeness that's happening as the slower vibrations come up to the surface, to be included into that wholeness, into that the zero, the full cycle, the divine order. So just wanting to kick off 2025 with an awareness that, especially because it's a 25 year, there's like being able to use the rocket that's in the rocket fuel that's in the rocket. So whatever we're going to be up to in 2025, there's more power behind it, is probably the simplest way to say what the synthesis of bringing up the year, the century. And it can be fun to look at the century, maybe depending on your age, right? If you knew somebody that was born in the early 1900s, or even if you just look kind of what's happened in your lifespan this far, or your parents' lifespan, or your grandparents' lifespan, or their great grandparents' lifespan, there's a lot that happens in a century. From 1900 to 1991, there was a lot that happened in that century, a lot that changed in that century. 2000 to 2100, there's also a lot of evolution in a century. So when we get to, again, 25 years in, it's almost like the power that's been building in the first quarter of the century gets to be used. There's a little bit of a like a monopoly, don't stop, pass go, collect $200. Like there's that kind of an energy where a building of power, a building of momentum, a building of rocket fuel, then gets to be applied, or gets to be utilized. Like it needed to stabilize more to be able to utilize it. So that's kind of the first thing that I want to share about the divine numerology of 2025, is that there's going to be a lot of fuel, a lot of power that can be accessible in 2025, that's been building. And that's where our mastery really is required. So let's look in the 25, that again, there's a repetition. So if we look at the decade of from 2020 to 2030, with the twos repeating, whenever there's a repetition in a year, or numbers, maybe you see 1111 or those kinds of things. It's like putting it in bold or big font or highlighting it or underscoring it or to the power of 2. There's an amplification of that number. So from 2020 to 2029, there's in that decade, the 2 of the 20 is repeated. It's amplified. There's a deepening into that theme or into that focus. And so the 2, again, like I've talked about it in terms of momentum and positioning, yet it also, the 2 has a lot to do around relationships, around partnering, and that is a larger wink or nod to also what this decade is. And so we're halfway through in 2025, we're halfway through this decade of 2020 to 2029, 2030. And so again, there's more of that, like, okay, so we're 25% through the century and we're 50% through the decade, and the 2 is repeating it. And the 2 is repeating. And so pay attention to your relationships in this decade from 2020 to 2030. It is going to be paramount to and key to this decade and to maximizing the energy trends in this decade. And so in Divine Transmissions, we do talk about relationships in a lot of different ways. Maybe you've done or want to do our Visionary Heart activation on relationships. We also have our Visionary Heart activation, which is number 1 in the Divine Numerology, which has a lot to do with that, relationships and recalibrating relationships. We have the birthright of love activation from the Magdalene codes that has a lot to do with your relationship with yourself. And so there's relationships everywhere in what it is that we're doing in Divine Transmissions, and also a primary theme in 2025. Now, I know that sometimes relationships can be kind of pushed to the side as an afterthought, or as like, like I'll get to my relationships when I have time on the weekends, or survival consciousness in the old paradigm. Again, it may be depositioning relationships, and yet in the new paradigm, relationships are really not only a phenomenal area of spiritual evolution and advancement, because there's a lot of slower vibrations that can come up to the surface as we really come into a greater alignment with relationships. There's also this expansion energy to relationships. So really being simultaneously open and discerning in your relationships. And so there may be in 2025 where you notice, and you've already been noticing this, where some relationships come to a place of completion, where you're no longer going to settle for what might have been acceptable previously, like just a holding of a higher standard when it comes to relationship with yourself, relationship with others, relationship with source, relationship with your guides, relationship with your energy, relationship with your, like, relationships are everywhere. They touch everything. And so your consciousness in relationships is always going to make a big difference in what it is that you're up to in 2025. So we've talked about the century of 2000 to 2099, and that we're a quarter of the way through. We've talked about the decade of 2020 to 2030, and we're halfway through. And then now let's talk about the 25, and then we'll add it all up together, and then I'm going to bring the guides in. And as we're talking about this, right, it's, yes, it's information, yet it's also, there's an energetic transmission to this. There's an aspect of the numbers that really become keys and codes and signposts for us along the way. And so the energy trends, as I'm talking about it, and as the guides are bringing them in as well, there's also a transmission that you receive from this that is supporting your energy to come into greater alignment with what's on the altar universally for 2025 for us to focus on, so that it doesn't feel like a surprise, or you're not going like, "Ooh, how come it seems like this is coming up to the surface when I wasn't aware of it?" There's just a greater consciousness to it. So the 25 really has a lot to do with genius. In 2024, if we add it all up together, it was an 8 number. In 2025, we add it all together as a 9 number. And from the divine numerology that we use, the 8, it already had a big focus on being in your divine genius, what we talk about, the ascended masteries or your highest contribution. And we do have as a free offering where you can download your divine design type in this lifetime. That really is the number between 1 and 9 that you can access, that really shares a lot about the ascended masteries that you carry or your divine genius. And so 2024 was very much about also your capacity to choose, really choosing to be in your level of divine genius. And 2025 has a lot to do with, let's just say it this way, embracing even more of your galactic genius, embracing even more of the genius that you carry that is beyond the central sun, the genius that you carry that it is from higher states of consciousness, and that there's a real pleasure in that. There's a real pleasure in that. The guides that are associated with the number 25 are the path of the Venus light, beings of light. So I'm curious if they're going to come in the channeling here. And when the path of the Venus light, beings of light came in, it was probably around 2012 when I first started partnering with them, and they just kind of come in at certain times and they come out, and they're not like the main guides that I partner with. However, they are present, and they're going to be even more present in 2025, because from their galaxy, their origin, what is given in their environment is that everybody comes in knowing who they are, what their highest gift is, and they just share it full out. There's no caring what somebody else thinks. There's no diluting it. There's no holding back. There's no trying to do be a Jackie of all trades. There's a real specialization in the path of the Venus light that, again, when we look at the larger century, is going to be even more important, because as we're unhooking from separation consciousness, even though the new paradigm is already here, and we're unhooking even more from survival consciousness and being motivated by survival consciousness, there's a lot of uncoupling or deconditioning to one size fits all, or trying to fit in, or flying under the radar, and there's a lot of perceived safety in that, and that the 2025, there's that galactic genius, or that unique genius that is really here to shine. So the path of the Venus light, beings of light, talk about, if you're a strawberry, be the most sun-ripened, juicy strawberry that you can be. And that the strawberry isn't secretly wishing that it was a cantaloupe. And so really letting your unique flag fly, like letting your weirdness shine, daring to be different, daring to, you already are different, yet daring to just be like, this is it. This is who I am. This is how I operate. This is how I see things, without any of that kind of holding back. And there is, a big part of my divine mission in this lifetime, in this incarnation, it has to do with bringing innovative and ancient heart wisdom to the planet for the evolution and consciousness. And especially as we're each in our seat of our divine genius, then things flow and work together so much more. So one of the illusion lies that's going to be pretty present in 2025 is the imposter syndrome. And the imposter syndrome is like, who am I? Or somebody else could do this better, or like that sense that if you're really in your divine genius, that it can be so easy that you just go like, am I, can I really get paid for this? Or am I taking advantage of others for being in my divine genius? There's just going to be some kind of a amplification of the imposter syndrome in 2025. So if you know that, because it's one thing to just be, kind of sharing your levels of competency or your levels of even excellence, but really to be in your divine genius and shining your light freely and fully, without apology, without playing by somebody else's rules. There's a deeper level of vulnerability with that. There's a deeper level of visibility with that. And so the survival consciousness can come up, and especially imposter syndrome. So if you already make a decision, I'm going to bring the guides in here as we're kind of winding down. If you already make a decision at the beginning of 2025 that you're really going to dedicate, or any time, if you listen to this in 2026, you're going to garner more from it. If you already make a decision in 2025 that you're, when you notice imposter syndrome coming up, that you're just going to see that as a sign of being on the right path, that you're not going to let that stop you. And again, that it's like everybody's in the right relationship with who they are and why they incarnated, and sharing their highest contribution. And just imagine how much power and potency that can bring into the world. So I've talked about the century of the 20, and that we're a quarter way through in the 25. I've talked about that we're halfway through the decade of 2020 to 2030. I've talked about the 25 and what that's about. And then I'm going to bring in the guides and let them wrap us up here and talk about the 9. Hello, dear ones. This is an expanded Council of Light, moving more into the forefront of this divine transmission. We're taking a moment to stabilize the energy field that we are transmitting from and to, because this energy trends for 2025 broadcast is going to be reaching a lot of you who have been looking for us and looking to be connecting even more to your own power and to your own brilliance. And these are 2 words that we would bring forward to encapsulate the energies of 2025 is the power of your brilliance, is the power of your brilliance. is the power of your brilliance, is the power of your brilliance, is the power of your brilliance, the power of your brilliance. And so now that the energy is stable and we brought forward also to encapsulate what Danielle has shared thus far of the power of your brilliance, we do want to speak about the 9, because the 9 is added up. The 2 plus the 2 is the 4 plus the 5 equals 9. So 2025 is a 9 year. And when you get to 2026, it'll be a 10-year, yet it'll reduce back to a 1. And so when there's a simultaneity of larger cycles, like as was shared, 2025 is a quarter of the way through the century, and 2025 is halfway through the decade, and 2025 is actually at the end of the primary numbers in divine numerology. You're going to go back to a 1. You're going to go back to a 1. And then a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9. 2025 is at the end of our 25 divine numerology. In 2024, in divine light activation, it is really, again, like the full creation of the divine self. And 2025 is like sprinkles on that. And so there's a simultaneity of like being 25% through something, 50% through something, and then pretty much 90% or 100% through something in this year. And that's going to bring a lot of, the 9 is traditionally associated in numerology with completion. And we agree with that from the perspective that there's a lot that you are completing, and completing in terms of completing slower vibrations, or completing old patterns, or completing habits that are outdated, or completing feeding, living in the old paradigm. And yet we also mean completing by fulfilling that what you've been up to for a while in 2025, there's the energy to the power to have it be brilliant, to have it be fulfilled, to have it be completed. And so you'll probably sense some urgency or some awareness or some recognition of like, okay, what is it that is really going to be important to fulfill, to have fulfilled in 2025. Now, the 9 in our divine numerology has a lot to do with, let's say, multidimensional communication and your capacity to amplify, being able to communicate in the higher dimensions, multidimensionally, with your own higher self, with your inner guidance, with the divine directly, with guides, with one another through what you could call telepathy, really honing your skill of multidimensional communication. And we do focus a lot on this in the Magdalene codes, and also really in all the things that we're up to. So the master classes are an amazing way to get started with the visionary heart activation, or the birthright of love activation. And then the 9 also has a lot to do with numbers. And so 2025 will mm, uh, we're looking at the best way to say this, because when we first say numbers, your mind is going to go to money. And yes, 2025 is an amazing year to be very clear and empowering around your relationship with money. And yet it's more than that. When we talk about divine numbers, numbers are everywhere: dates, time, money. There's numbers on your mailbox, your address, your driver's license, your bank account. Like numbers are everywhere. And and numbers also they very much are related to sacred geometry and the creation of things. And so when we look at 2025 and we're wrapping up here, yet to recognize that it's like you're 25% into creating something, you're 50% into creating something, and you're pretty much 100% into creating something all at the same time in the same year. That the sacred geometry of those numbers, of the patterns, of the units of consciousness that create, of the elements, of the ATCG in your DNA. There's a larger coding in a positive way that will be tapped into in 2025. So that may be something that you're not necessarily going to be having in your primary focus as the energy trend of 2025. And yet we would invite you to be noticing numbers even more in 2025 and beyond. So the power of your brilliance, the power of your brilliance, and that you have a lot of power built up over the last 25 years to empower the power of your brilliance. So as we're wrapping up here, extending our appreciation to your contribution to the elevation in consciousness. Thank you for tuning in. All is light and love, and we are all.